Okay, sorry we didn't get to finish in person as you like it, with the great reveal at the end and how, my brain's not working. That was the problem last week. How Rosalind as Ganymede is able to resolve everything by having Phoebe and Sylvius match perfectly, etc. If I were ever to wed woman, it would be you, and then we get the great reveal and stuff. So, ideally, in a perfect world where we would have all the time in the world, we would begin this part of the class with Richard II, okay? Because Richard II is the introduction, or it's the first part of what's called the second tetralogy. It leads us into the Henry IV and Henry V plays. But we don't live in a perfect world, obviously, and we don't have all the time. So we're having to drop Richard II, and we're probably going to end up, we're either going to drop Henry V or The Tempest. I haven't decided yet. Depends on.
You can't drop The Tempest.
Depends on, I know, it depends on how long I go over with these plays. Because I've got to talk about some background information that's not covered in the introduction to the Henry IV play or Henry V, but in the introduction to Richard II. First, this series of plays, Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V, are called the second tetralogy. Tetralogy just means four works, okay? It's the second one solely because it's the second one Shakespeare wrote, right? He wrote them, internal, external evidence, references to the plays, etc., around 1598-99, all four of them. So notice that. These are four major plays that he cranks out in about 2 years, okay? And he's also turning out other things about the same time. The period 97, 98 to about 1602, man, it's like he's on fire. He's just throwing an awful lot out there. Not just histories, tragedies, comedies as well, okay? So that's the second tetralogy. They deal with events 1390s to 1415. 1415, that's easily dateable because Henry V, the big battle in Henry V, is the Battle of Agincourt in France, which is in 1415. That's where we get the great, which is why I don't want to drop it, we get the great St. Crispin's Day speech delivered by Henry V, one of the great, I get chill bumps just thinking about it, rousing the troops kind of speech. It's where we get the phrase, this band of brothers. That's where that comes from, okay? The first tetralogy is Henry VI, parts 1 through 3, okay, and Richard III. We know this is written early, okay, 1589 to 94. One of the Henry VI plays, I want to say it's 3, but I'm not positive about that, is partially quoted. It's quoted and adapted by Robert Greene in his work published in 1592, late 1592, called A Groat's Worth of Wit and 1,000 of Remembrance. A groat is like a penny. So it's like a penny for your thoughts, okay? This is his kind of dying jab at the world. Robert Greene, by the early 1590s, he was a sour old puss, right? I mean, he was not a happy man because people like Shakespeare were taking his place in the literary world, in plays and such. Shakespeare borrows from Greene, partially for As You Like It, as well as for Twelfth Night. I think it's Twelfth Night. Pretty much rewrites some of the stuff that Greene did. And bear in mind, I don't remember if I said this at the beginning of the semester, none of Shakespeare's plots are original. None of them he comes up with on his own. everything Shakespeare wrote, he had source material. It's what he does with that material that makes him so damn unique that nobody else could come close to. Okay? So the first tetralogy, events of 1420s to 85. This is the period of what's called the Wars of the Roses between the houses of Lancaster and York. Right? That division between these two houses, royal houses, we're going to take in a moment. We're going to turn back to a genealogy on the back, in the back of the book. Those two houses descend from a common ancestor, the Plantagenets. Okay, but they start to vie for control. Who's going to rule? Who's going to be deposed? That kind of thing. That's what's called the Wars of the Roses. The roses were a red rose and a white rose, symbolizing the House of Lancaster and the House of York. That begins back here. That division between these two branches, and out of multiple branches of the family. Okay? This time period, who's reigning during this time period? 1390s to 1400, late 1380s. Chaucer. Okay, this is the Richard II who's reigning at the time of Chaucer. There's a time of great upheaval in England. You've got the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. You've got the Black Plague in the mid 1350s, 1360s. I mean, it's that plague that wipes out a third of the population of Europe at the time. With the Peasants' Revolt, you've got social upheaval. You've got the birth of what's called the middle class. See, in the Anglo-Saxon times, you pretty much had people tied to the land or the aristocracy. There were no middle range. There were no, so to speak, shop owners, people who were kind of above the lower class but not quite aristocracy. That begins during this period. That development of a middle class, the burgher class, the guild halls, the guilds, where people working a trade band together to control what? They control two things by banding together and forming guilds.
Production.
Keep going. With production, quality control, and prices. I mean, that's where you get, essentially, we're going to set a predetermined price for things. Okay? So that builds their economic status and such. A lot of church upheaval. I mean, read Chaucer. One of the things Chaucer writes quite a bit about, not only in Canterbury Tales, but other stuff, portrayal of the corruption in the church. Just read the Canterbury Tales and see what he does with all of the clerical members of the church, except for the parson. He portrays them all negatively. They're all corrupt, except for the lowly church person and such. Okay? So when Shakespeare turns his lens to this, okay, obviously these are all what? Every one of these individuals that is mentioned. Kings, royalty, monarchy, aristocracy. Okay? And when is he writing these? 1589 to approximately 99. Who is still on the throne, but barely? Queen Elizabeth. Okay? Who's Elizabeth descended from? Who's your father? Henry VIII. Who is the son of Henry VII, okay, who's the son of, so when Shakespeare's writing this stuff, he's not, in one sense, yes, he's dealing with ancient history, but he's also dealing with kind of current cultural monarchical genealogical history, okay? So Shakespeare's got to be careful with what he says, especially, for example, Richard III. Why is Richard III so important to Shakespeare? Or why could he be? Let me put it that way. Who defeated Richard III to become king? Henry VII. Okay. Who was Elizabeth's grandfather. Okay. How have any of you read Richard III before? Seen any productions?
Saw the
Hollow Crown version?
That was the very winter of our discontent.
Exactly. A horse, my kingdom, 4 horse, he says at the end of the play. Richard III, it had been thought for hundreds of years, essentially from his death until the 20th century, for the most part, it was thought Richard III was a horrible king. And it was thought that because of Shakespeare, because of his portrayal of Richard III. Shakespeare's portrayal of Richard III is based upon source material available to Shakespeare in his day. Okay? So why would that source material be negative?
propaganda.
What kind of propaganda? Who gets to write history?
The winners, so it's written by the Tudors who defeated him.
The winners, okay? After his death, Richard III was portrayed by Henry VII and Henry VIII's official writers in a very negative light. It's from them that we get the portrayal of Richard III, for example, as a hunchback. As in not being able to stand up straight because he had this big lump on his back. Okay? Just the fact of that physiological detail meant bad in the Renaissance. Why? Because it goes all the way back to Plato. Plato essentially said, if you're beautiful on the outside, you're beautiful on the inside. If you're foul on the outside, you're foul on the inside. All right? Well, that mentality gets adopted. Shakespeare portrays him as a hunchback. We now know, because of the discovery of Richard's skeleton in 2012, his body nobody knew where he had been buried. From 1485, when he died, until 2012, when his body was accidentally discovered during excavation for a parking lot in the town of Leicester. Okay? Well, we now know from the discovery of the skeleton, he had scoliosis. He had a pretty bad twist or bend in his spine. Not the kind of spine, so if you were looking at an x-ray of me like this, where his spine would be like this. But looking at me like this, if you saw an x-ray, the spine would be like this. So it has a S curve in it. If it's the other kind of bend, he would be bent over as he is portrayed in the play. All right? But everything that was known about Richard during Shakespeare's lifetime was negative. And Shakespeare just continues that. Because keep in mind, he's writing in the 1590s, during this whole period, probably even going back as early as 89, but definitely by 1592, he's writing for his Players' Company, which is called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, because they're patronized by the Lord Chamberlain. And who's the Lord Chamberlain? I don't mean who, give me a name. I mean, what kind of position is that? It's like the second most powerful person in England. The right-hand man, so to speak, to the Queen. And we know Shakespeare, we know anecdotally that Shakespeare was favored by Queen Elizabeth. Okay? Anecdotally, when Queen Elizabeth saw a production of Henry IV, Part 1, and met the character of John Falstaff, a big, fat knight, way past his prime, okay, who only wants to rob and whore and drink, okay? Rob the poor, sleep with the whore, and drink, okay? She loved that character. And anecdotally, she requested Master Shakespeare to write a play focusing on Falstaff. Anybody know what play that is? Merry Wives of Windsor. And it's about Falstaff trying to get in and out of the beds of the merry wives of Windsor, and then various people pulling a fast one on him. And that was supposedly premiered as a private production for the Queen. That is, it wasn't at the Globe where everybody could come watch it. It was either Hampton Court or Windsor or one of the royal houses. Okay. 8:17. Before we look at the genealogy, two other things, two ideas. These are both mentioned in the introduction to Richard II. I'd kind of encourage you to read that introduction. I'm not requiring you because it's helpful. This idea or doctrine of passive obedience and divine right. Most of us know what divine right. The idea that the king or queen rules by the right given by God. Goes back to Romans. All government is instituted by God. And therefore, you obey that government. Okay? The passive obedience part is, you might have a ruler who is evil. I don't mean bad. I mean evil. Pick your president. Everybody has their own, idea of a bad president. I won't use any living president, James Buchanan is often thought, James Buchanan and one of my personal unfavorites, Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay? Wilson, for a whole host of reasons. The worst of which, in my opinion, is the man was a rabid racist. He removed all blacks from the government. And he imprisoned Eugene Debs and others because they spoke out against World War I. So, bad president. Evil? See, I don't go that far. Wilson's pretty close. Buchanan, he dithered while the Civil War boiled just beneath the surface and then, erupted and such. Biden, Trump, Bush, wherever, okay? Bad versus evil. What this idea suggested was that even if that leader is evil, you must passively obey. Why? Because that individual might have been put in place by God for, anybody want to take a guess? What purpose? On?
People.
Punishment on the people. In other words, that person is given power and authority as kind of a scourge, like a whip. And what is the purpose of a whip? Is it simply to inflict pain? No, it's to draw the people back. Okay? Old Testament example, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is called in the Old Testament the anointed of God. Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. And he's also portrayed as being totally insane, or going totally insane, out there eating the grass with the cows and the oxen and such. Okay? But he is brought into place for a purpose, to inflict pain to draw individuals back, or to draw countries back and such. So the idea of passive obedience is, no matter how bad your leader gets, your king or queen gets, you gotta obey. Why? Because ultimately, you're not obeying that person. That obedience gets transferred to God. Okay? So, with that in that, what does it mean you do when you have a horrible leader?
Follow them. Just do it.
You grin and bear it. You suck it up and you just go on with your life. Okay? Not obviously the modern, democratic Republican democracy kind of government we have. You have a bad leader, you remove them by election or impeachment if you can get, all that kind of stuff. Well, they didn't have that back then. King was it. Okay? But ever since, where is he? Richard II, every king, every king kind of had in the back of his mind, or queen had the back of her mind, the people can be fickle. And while this is, so to speak, the law of the land, sometimes people take it into their hands to replace that right, okay? Richard II is a perfect example. Richard II, read the play, Richard II is an ineffectual king. All he likes to do, he's got battles going on with the Irish, he's got battles with the French and stuff, but all he likes to do is party and enrich his friends. And he enriches his friends at the expense of the people, okay? And he makes a decision earlier in the play. Two men are about to do battle, cousins, right? Sons of fathers who are the sons of one man. There's like 8 children who have children and all that kind of stuff. We'll look at that in a moment. So he's got 2 guys who are going to do battle, and one of them he banishes for life, and the other one he banishes for a period of 20 years, and then retracts that and makes it 10 years. The one that he banishes for 10 years is Henry Bolingbroke, who is going to become Henry IV. And in the play, Henry Bolingbroke is banished, and then he comes back. And when he comes back, all the people cheer him. They praise him, etc., etc., etc. All right? Richard is deposed. It's the first time in English history this happened. All right? He's deposed. Actually, literally, he abdicates. He gives up the crown. There's a difference between being deposed and giving it up. But it's kind of a sword in the back deposing. Oh yes, I will give up my crown, as he feels the point. So, he's deposed, he gives up the crown, and he dies mysteriously. I think it is in Pomfret Castle, all right? That part's all historically true, okay? Henry is named king, and he's king for 1.5 of the plays, essentially. 1 3/4 of the plays. But Henry, we're going to see, always has a problem. What was it we were just, or am I thinking of a different class? What problem do you have if you're a mob boss and you got your position by knocking off the boss ahead of you?
Paranoid.
Why?
Someone else has been here.
There's always a wannabe boss, okay? He's always wondering, who's going to try to take my job? And what he's really wondering is my son going to try to take it? Who becomes Henry V, okay? Now, very briefly, where is it? I stuck a piece of paper back there. Turn to, well, I can't tell you what page, because your books are different. Turn to the genealogy at the back of your book. Hopefully it's after the appendix for films and videos. Appendix 3, Shakespeare and Performance. You've got a royal genealogy of England from 1154 to 1625. Okay? The first part are the Plantagenet kings. Henry II through Edward III. Okay? Plantagenet, French name. These are the kings and queens that come after the line of William of Normandy, William the Bastard, William the Conqueror. All right? Beginning with Henry I and on down the line. Okay? After that, you have the Lancastrian kings. Notice the Plantagenet kings ends with Edward III on that right-hand column, okay, who dies in 1377. He is the progenitor of the Lancastrian line of kings. So you have Edward III, whose wife is Philippa of Hainault, and we have 7 children, okay? Edward, the Black Prince, okay? William of Hatfield, who died as a child. Lionel, Duke of Clarence, who's going to figure in this play. He does also in, actually not in these, he's going to figure in Richard II. John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, who is one of the most important people in medieval British history. He's called the Father of Kings. Okay? Chaucer writes his Book of the Duchess to John of Gaunt for his dead wife. All right? Blanche of Lancaster. Then you have Edmund of Langley, Duke of York. So there you have Lancaster, York. But notice, John of Gaunt, he is the he's the 4th son. He never becomes king. Becomes a father of kings, right? Edmund of Langley, Duke of York. And then you have Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, William of Windsor, who dies young, all right? So Edward, all the way on the left-hand column, what is Edward Duke of? It's a misleading question. He's not really Duke. What is the eldest male son called in line to the throne? Prince of Wales. It's always Prince of Wales, all right? So Edward is the Prince of Wales. He never becomes king. He dies, okay? His next in line brother doesn't become king because he dies as a child. Lionel, Duke of Clarence, never becomes king, all right? So, skip on down. Edward, Black Prince, marries Joan of Kent. They produce Richard II, okay? So after Edward III dies, the one who becomes king after him is Richard. Notice, Richard's born in 1367. Edward III dies in 1377. Richard is 10 years old when he becomes king. That's not the youngest by any means. Some became king at 5 or 6. And so you have somebody with muscle standing behind saying, I'm the Lord Protector, Prince Regent, things like that, all right? So, from Edward the Black Prince, we get Richard II. Now, go back over to John of Gaunt. John marries Blanche of Lancaster, okay? They have a son, Henry Bolingbroke, or you want to pronounce it Bolingbroke, that's fine too. Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Hereford, not Hereford, that middle gets elided. Duke of Hereford, later Henry IV. So there's Richard II, notice, and Henry Bolingbroke. They're cousins. Why is Richard II king and not Henry IV? 2 reasons. One, he's directly descended from Edward III, son of a king. And 2, he's actually also older than Henry Bolingbroke. But if Richard had died, Henry would have become king, Henry Bolingbroke. There wouldn't have been a Richard II, it would have been Edward III. And then, because there aren't any other male heirs from William of Hatfield, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, John of Gaunt, etc., it would have gone to Bolingbroke, right? So, from Bolingbroke, notice, who marries Mary de Bohun, we get 4 children, 4 sons. Henry of Monmouth, Prince of Wales. Monmouth, by the way, is in Wales. So he becomes Henry V. He marries Catherine of Valois, which is a French territory. She is the daughter of the French Dauphin, if I remember correctly, prince, okay? They have a son. Clarence is not important, neither is, John, Duke of Lancaster, is going to figure prominently in Henry IV plays and in Henry V a little bit. Clarence is going to be there briefly, okay? Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, also. So, Henry V gives rise to Henry VI. That's the link. So, even though these are written second, if you follow them in this order, you kind of get, because I'm going to modify that in just a second, you kind of get a chronology of English medieval history to the founding of the Tudor dynasty. Because that begins with the end of Richard III. Turn your page, and you have the Yorkist kings. Okay? And the important ones there are when you go to from Edward IV to Henry Tudor, who becomes Henry VII. Okay? And you've got Edward, Earl of March, on the left hand, and all the way to the right hand side, you've got Richard, Duke of Gloucester. All right? And then we're not going to talk about the. You can see the line of the Tudor kings going back to Edward III, how it traces down. Again, how's the monarchy passed on?
Primogeniture?
Eldest son. Until when? About, what is this, 2024? Like 15 years ago.
I think it was like it was definitely around, I think in 2012 when they decided that like the eldest female was also like eligible.
It was when Charlotte was born.
It was when Princess Charlotte was born.
So I think 2013.
Who's the eldest child? Was 2013, because it's the last time I taught a course in London where my family all came. Yeah, 2013. Okay, so it took until 2013 for that to get changed, the law of primogeniture. Okay, let's see here. Henry IV. So, try to put yourself, one other comment before we get into play. What is Shakespeare writing?
History, isn't
Is he writing history?
he? Propaganda?
Entertainment, propaganda maybe. Richard III is definitely propaganda. It's anti-Richard propaganda, okay? Or pro-Tudor propaganda. Bear in mind, Shakespeare, as with other writers, they had to be careful with what they said. Elizabeth did, after the Spanish Armada defeat in 1588, when Catholics of Spain, Catholics of Northern England tried to overthrow Elizabeth, okay, she became very hard, fascistic, you could almost call it. Not an economic theory, though. Very anti-Catholic, to where she had laws passed, if you were a Catholic priest in England, that in and of itself was cause for capital punishment. You didn't even have to be practicing it. You didn't have to be celebrating the Mass. Just being a Catholic priest was cause for your execution. People had their tongues cut out. People, famous Catholic poet, Robert Southey, had tongues cut out, had their hands cut off, the whole 9 yards, all right? So you had to be careful. And bear in mind, when Shakespeare writes this play, it stirred the waters. Because what do we see happen? We see an unpopular monarch get deposed. By the 1590s, by the late 1590s, Elizabeth is no longer as highly praised and glorified as she had been for one main reason. What has she not done? She hasn't produced an heir. In the 1590s, people in England are getting a little antsy. What's going to happen when she dies? Because they didn't know what the plans were. I mean, she has no male heir. There is an heir, kind of, but not of her. There's a blood connection. That's James VI of Scotland. Okay, he's cousin. So yeah, the bloodline gets maintained. So I mean, Shakespeare's got to be careful about that. Okay, so he's not writing history because one of the things he's going to do in these plays, we'll talk about, in this play. He compresses time. Events that take place over 20 years take place within months. And he changes ages of people. For example, in Henry IV, Part 1, we're going to meet the Earl of Northumberland. He's just going to be called Northumberland. Okay? Henry Percy. And he has a son named Henry Percy, who is in line to be Earl of Northumberland. That son is nicknamed Hotspur. All right? In Shakespeare's play, Hotspur is roughly the same age as Prince Hal. He wasn't. Hotspur was the age of Hal's father, Henry IV. But Shakespeare wants Hotspur, and Shakespeare doesn't create the nickname. That's what Henry Percy Jr. was called. Shakespeare wants Hotspur to be the foil for Prince Hal. Now, what's a foil? What's the purpose of a foil? Anybody?
Bring out opposite qualities within one character.
To bring out opposite qualities, or another way of putting that, to bring out the positive qualities in the protagonist, in the main character. Okay? So you put two characters together, and this person's personality draws out the virtues of this person, and vice versa. Hotspur has positive qualities. His willingness to act is a positive quality. His bravery, his courage, those are positive qualities. He's a damn fool. That's not a positive quality. Okay? In his bravery and his courage, his moral uprightness, all that kind of stuff, compared with Prince Hal as we meet him in the beginning of the play, tells us what about Hal? Or what does it show us about Prince Hal? Describe, how many of you have gotten into this a couple of acts? One or two. Describe Prince Hal's character when we first meet him. And by the way, the Hollow Crown with Tom Hiddleston as Hal, it's just about the best there is. He makes a really, really good Hal. And only two, in my opinion, only two modern actors really do Shakespeare really, really, well, more than two, really do Shakespeare really well. Hiddleston, Benedict Cumberbatch, and then you go to David Tennant, and then you go to the next older generation, you're talking Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, that group. There are some in between. I can never remember his name.
What does it look like?
The guy's balding. He played one of the government heads in some of the Bond movies. Man, he played Iago in Othello. I saw it in 2016. It's fantastic. So we open the play, and the events of this play have just concluded within a month or so. In other words, Henry IV has just become king in the last 6 months at most. All right? So we have our dramatis personae in the bottom of 787. Henry IV, Prince Henry, Prince of Wales, okay? John of Lancaster, those are Henry IV's sons. We have the Earl of Westmoreland and Sir Walter Blunt, all right? These are Henry's party. These are Henry IV's men, right? The next group of actors, notice, are rebels against the king. The reason they're rebels against the king is because they were supporters of Richard II. Well, kind of. They aided and abetted Henry IV in his rise to the throne. And now they're having second thoughts, okay? So you have the Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, and you have Harry Percy, Hotspur, his son. Harry's a diminutive form for Henry. It's the colloquial, friendly form for Henry. If you go to Alnwick Castle today in Northumberland, it's spelled Alnwick, but it's pronounced Alnwick. And you go into I used to take my Harry Potter students there because it was a filming location. You go into the general opening courtyard. There's this big statue of Hotspur on a horse. This thing's hundreds of years old. Okay, this is the second largest continuously inhabited castle in the UK after Windsor. It's the House of Percy's been there since at least 11 or 1200. Okay, it's a great castle to visit. Then you have Earl of Worcester, not Worcester, Worcester, Northumberland's younger brother, Lord Mortimer, Edmund Mortimer is his name, also referred to as the Earl of March, Owen Glendower. Anybody know anything about Owen Glendower? Welsh leader. He's often in here and in other material, he's just called the Glendower, just like we're going to see Archibald Douglas, Earl of Douglas, is referred to both in the plays and in extra play material, historical material, just called the Douglas, because of his size and prowess in war. I mean, nobody would want to take this man on. Okay, so you have the Welsh Glendower, and Glendower was supposed to be a magician. In the play, we're going to have stuff about devilry mentioned. All right, I mean historically, he was considered by the English to be a magician because the Welsh were able to do things the English didn't understand. Guerrilla warfare. All right. English have always been against the Welsh. The English have always been against the Scots, which is why up to today, the Welsh and Scots still do not like the English. They would love to get some Scots would, not anymore. But the Welsh would love to get their independence. Sir Richard Vernon, Archbishop of York, also called Richard Scroop. So you're going to see both names. Sometimes you'll see the names in italics used rather than their titles. Okay, so it can get confusing. Then you have Lady Percy, Hotspur's wife, and Mortimer's sister, we're told. Okay, and then you have Lady Mortimer, who's Mortimer's wife and Glendower's daughter. Okay, so she's Welsh, and we're going to be told that when they first meet, she spoke to him, sang to him. He didn't know a lick of Welsh, but because she was so beautiful and her voice and the song were so beautiful, just the sound. Okay, the Welsh are known around the world as the greatest singers. They have an annual singing competition up in one of the mountains. All the great singers show up, right? And then a whole bunch of other characters. Sir John Falstaff, who is the name is supposed to be indicative. He is a fallen staff. A staff should be stout and upright. His is fallen, okay? He's named, it is thought, he's named after a man named Sir John Oldcastle, an actual knight who lived, all right? And the family apparently did not like what Shakespeare did with his character. He's a drunkard, he's a braggart, he's a robber and thief. Just think of all the good vices, and that, John Falstaff kind of embodies those. Ned Pwan's or Poins if you want, Bardolph, Peto, Gad's Hill. Gad's Hill is both a ranger of there's going to be a robbery in the play. It's also the location of the robbery. So that gets a little confusing at times. You have Mistress Quickly, who's the hostess of the tavern. She shows up in Merry Wives of Windsor. Okay. It's kind of also implied she's a madam. Francis and a few others, and then a bunch of other pretty much unimportant people. So, you have the king come in and look at just his opening speech. So shaken as we are, so wan with care, find we a time for frighted peace to pant, and breathe short-winded accents of new broils to be commenced in strands afar remote. So, his first 4 lines, what has he told us? Who's the we?
Is it the royal?
It's the royal we. Me, I am what? Shaken, okay, disturbed, troubled, wan with care. What does wan mean? Pale. Okay. Find we a time for frighted peace. Doesn't frighted peace, isn't that like a paradox? Or almost an oxymoron? How can you be at peace if you're frighted? How can you be frightened if you're at peace? It's short-lived. It's tenuous peace. Okay? To pant, that is to get good breaths, and breathe short-winded accents of new broils to be commenced. In other words, he's saying, we have a moment here to catch our breaths and do what? Plan for new broils, new battles, new wars. Where? In strands, shores, far remote. What shores? Where is he talking about going to war? Ireland? Scotland? No.
France?
No. Jerusalem.
Oh, right.
The Holy Land. Why? This is at the time of the Crusades. The later Crusades. But he's going to tell us why he's going to do, beginning with line 18, but I'm going to back up a bit. So he says, no more the thirsty entrance of this soil shall daub her lips with her own children's blood. Notice I read that all without pausing. I didn't take a break at the end of the line. Okay? Shakespeare probably intends us not to take those pauses when he doesn't have a mark of punctuation at the end of a line. Assuming the punctuation in your books is even close to what Shakespeare intended. So he says, our soil is not going to what? What did God say to Cain after Cain killed Abel? Your brother's blood cries out from the ground. He's saying, we're not going to stain our ground anymore with her own children's blood, the children of England. No more shall trenching war channel her fields, nor bruise her flowers with the armored hoofs of hostile paces. Hostility here, it's gone. Those opposed eyes, which like the meteors of a troubled heaven, all of one nature of one substance bred, did lately meet in the intestine shock and furious close of civil butchery. Civil, meaning within family, like civil war, shall now in mutual well-beseeming ranks march all one way and be no more opposed against acquaintance, kindred, and allies. We who were battling each other, we're now going to go with one purpose, one goal, one direction, in another direction, to fight another enemy. The edge of war, like an ill-sheathed knife, no more shall cut his master. Therefore, friends, who's he speaking to? Your glance at the top of the page, Enter the king, Lord John of Lancaster, that is his second eldest son, the Earl of Westmoreland, Sir Walter Blunt, and others. Okay? He's got his supporters and followers and some of those who are going to become against him. Okay? Therefore, friends, as far as to the sepulchre of Christ, who soldier now, okay, the whose soldier now? He's talking about I/us. We are now soldiers of Christ, under whose blessed cross we are impressed and engaged to fight. Forthwith the power of English shall we levy. I'm going to raise an army to go liberate Jerusalem. Okay? Whose arms were molded in their mother's womb to chase these pagans in those holy fields, over whose acres walked those blessed feet which 1400 years ago were nailed for advantage to the bitter cross. But this our purpose now is 12 months old. The purpose is 12 months old. In other words, we've been planning this for a year. Still haven't done it. And bootless 'tis to tell you we will go. Bootless. Rewardless. Remediless. Almost valueless. Therefore we meet not now. So, this is what we're going to do, but what has he just said? But not now. We're not meeting to plan that war now. I misspoke earlier. None of his quote unquote people who will later become enemies, they're not here yet. All right? Why are they meeting now? Then let me hear of you, my gentle cousin Westmoreland, what yesternight our council did decree in forwarding this dear expedience. In other words, what did the council decree regarding this plan to go help in the battle to liberate Jerusalem? Okay? And he says, yesternight, line 36, Westmoreland says, a post from Wales loaded with heavy news, whose worst was that the noble Mortimer, leading the men of Herefordshire to fight against the irregular and wild Glendower. Herefordshire is close to the border of Wales. Glendower, a Welsh captain, a Welsh leader, more than a captain, like king. All right? So Mortimer is leading arms against the Welsh, was by the rude hands of that Welshman taken, and 1,000 of his people butchered. So, the plan was we were going to prepare an army to go march against Jerusalem. Now we can't. Why? Mortimer, go back for a second to the dramatis personae. Lord Mortimer, Edmund Mortimer, also referred to as the Earl of March, who is married to Glendower's daughter. All right? Mortimer, but going against Glendower, okay? Why would he marry Glendower's daughter, first of all? Why often do royal houses intermarry?
To become allies.
To ally yourselves.
To preserve the bloodline.
To, well, that, but to try to forge peace. Notice the term, the verb I use, forge. Forging is not a natural act. You're bringing this piece of metal with this piece of metal, and you're going to force them together. Okay? It's an attempt to bring peace, probably, between the English forces and the Welsh forces. But Mortimer went to fight against the irregular and wild Glendower. Irregular probably means he doesn't fight in, according to the rules of war fashion. Why did the Americans, the colonists, defeat the Brits in the Revolutionary War? What did the Brits know about fighting? Surely you've seen some kind of stand up, people down in the front, get down on your knees, pull out your muskets, the guys stand in the back. And what were the Americans doing? Guerrilla warfare, hiding behind trees, behind rocks. It's not fair. It's not, noble, manly, gentlemanly to stand up and get shot at, to hide behind trees. So, Glendower's men slaughter 1,000 of Mortimer's men. Mortimer's men aren't just Mortimer's men. They are. But who ultimately are they?
The crowns.
They're the kings. See, according to the medieval notion of vassalage, or fiefdom, essentially, everybody exists in a hierarchy that, like we talked about at the beginning of the semester, the whole great chain of being within the human realm, you've got that chain also. And so everybody is connected from the lowest to the highest most. And each one of these people has a name like Earl, Duke, etc. They have a connection to the crown. Okay? And everyone who serves them, therefore, has a connection to the crown. They are ultimately the servants, the knights, warriors, etc., are ultimately servants of the king, which is why the king can tell an earl, I want you to send XYZ number of men to such and such place. And if that person says no, then that person is in open rebellion against the crown. All right? So, not only were the people butchered, 1,000 of his men butchered, but we're told, line 43, upon whose dead corpse there was such misuse, such beastly, shameless transformation by those Welsh women done, as may not be without much shame retold or spoken of. So what in the world is he talking about? None of you were born then, but you might know a little bit history or movies. What angered so much the United States in 1993 when we had a Black Hawk helicopter go down in Mogadishu, Somalia? Was it the fact that soldiers were killed, or that the Black Hawk helicopter went down? No, it was what happened afterwards. It was when soldiers were tied behind a jeep and dragged through the city, bodies to be falling apart, etc. You can go all the way back to the Iliad and discover you don't do that. You respect the dead. You give the dead a decent burial, even your enemy dead. More honored in the breach than in the observance. Line from Henry V. Okay? King. It seems then that the tidings of this broil break off our business for the Holy Land. Meaning, Glendower's got to pay. We'll have to hold off rescuing Jesus, metaphorically speaking, to kill these Welsh. And again, can't emphasize enough. The English and the Welsh, historically, hate each other. Why? The very name Welsh
Foreign.
means foreign.
It's an exonym.
What do you mean?
It's not a name that the Welsh use themselves.
Oh,
In the Welsh language, no. Well, yes, it's a name applied by the English. Yeah,
Cymru or Cymru, I can never remember which one it is. Wales means foreign land, exile land. And that term comes from all the way back to the Anglo-Saxon invasions of Britain in the middle 5th century AD. Okay? They were the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic tribes. They were the ones who labeled these people the Wallace, the foreigners, the exiles. Why? Because it is thought many of what are the now modern day Welsh descend from people who had been settlers in central and southern Britain and were pushed back. In other words, the old Gaelic Celts, most of those, there's no bloodline around anymore. Okay? These people are Celts who had lived in mainland, so to speak, Britain. So the anger between the modern day, or Shakespeare's day, Welsh and the Brits, or the hatred, was very strong. Just like it was between the Irish and the Brits. Just like it was between the Scots and the Brits. Okay? Only reason Shakespeare writes Macbeth, it's the only Scottish play. It's the only play really emphasizing Scottishness, is because of King James. It's written after King James becomes king. It's Shakespeare's sop to the new monarch, who also fancied himself a scholar of witchcraft and demons, and so we get witches. So, can't talk about the Holy Land anymore. Westmoreland. This matched with other did, my gracious Lord, for more uneven and unwelcome news. So, we've got this problem, and now there's another problem. More uneven and unwelcome news came from the north, and thus it did import. And here's that news. On Holy Rood Day, Rood is cross of Christ, so the Holy Rood Day, probably, it's interesting. Does that have a footnote? Does it give September 14th? Yep, September 14th, which is the celebration in the church of the exaltation of the cross, all right? It's when Constantine's mother, Helena, supposedly found it in the 320s AD. The gallant Hotspur there, notice, the gallant Hotspur, what's gallant mean? Brave, what else? Noble. It's got both of those, because you can be brave and ignoble. You can be brave and stupid. He's not, okay? They're looking up to Hotspur. The gallant Hotspur, and brave Archibald, the ever valiant and approved Scot. Approved means celebrated by the people. At Holmden met, where they did spend a sad and bloody hour, as by discharge of their artillery, in shape of likelihood the news was told, for he that brought them in the very heat and tide of their contention to take course, uncertain of the issue anyway. In other words, and one alone escaped to tell us. When this person fled from the battle between Archibald and Hotspur, Hotspur is English, Northumberland goes up to the border of Scotland. Okay? So you have Archibald defending Scotland, probably, or possibly invading England, and Hotspur repels or repulses him. Someone flees from that battle to bring down and tell them Hotspur and Archibald are at war. And we don't know how it ended. King. Here's a dear, true, industrious friend, Sir Walter Blunt, who lighted from his horse. Blunt kind of, steps forward, stained with the variation of each soil betwixt that Holmden and the seat of ours. He's the one who escaped. And he hath brought us much smooth and welcome news. The Earl of Douglas is discomfited, meaning he's been captured. This is the Douglas. 10,000 bold Scots, 22 knights, balked in their own blood. So, Douglas is captured, 10,000 Scots have died, and 22 knights. See, a knight kind of counted for a lot of men, because a knight is mounted on horseback, a knight is fully armored, and when a knight goes into battle, the knight doesn't go into battle alone. Every knight has his men who are behind and supporting him, because a knight is a large landholder. And then above the rank of knight, you have earl. Above the rank of earl, you've got duke, etc. Okay? So this is what Sir Walter Blunt saw. 10,000 dead Scots, 22 dead knights, the Douglas captured. Of prisoners, Hotspur took Mordake, Earl of Fife, the eldest son to the beaten Douglas, and the Earl of Athol, of Murray, Angus, and Menteith. So he's taken these earls. So what does that mean now? Hotspur has the Douglas captured and all these other earls. And is this not an honorable spoil, a gallant prize? What's he saying? Man, Hotspur, great job. Westmoreland. It is a conquest for a prince to boast of. Yeah. Because when Westmoreland says that, what is he implying?
You got competition.
A prince should be doing that. Not just Harry Hotspur. King. Yea, there thou makest me sad, and makest me sin in envy, that my lord Northumberland should be the father to so blessed a son. So if he envies Northumberland, what is he really telling us?
His son is not as good as Hotspur.
True, and I wish Hotspur was my son. A son, he's talking about Hotspur, who is the theme of honor's tongue. Now, what does that mean? The theme of honor's tongue. So when honor speaks, what does it say? Hotspur, Hotspur, Hotspur. Okay? Honor is a key theme in this play, and everything that it implies. Nobility, honesty, truth, loyalty, integrity. A son who is the theme of honor's tongue, amongst a grove, the very straightest plant. We have a phrase, straight as an arrow. Upright. There's nothing bent, nothing deformed, nothing devious, he's suggesting about Hotspur, who is sweet fortune's minion and her pride. So fortune, the goddess turning her wheel, he's telling us everything Hotspur does, what? Succeeds. This kid never fails. Whilst I, by looking on the praise of him, see riot and dishonor stain the brow of my young Harry. 84. Riot, debauchery, whoring. That's what's meant. Riot and dishonor stain the brow, the forehead of my young Harry. It's like he's saying Harry works at being a dishonorable wretch. Oh, that it could be proved that some night-tripping fairy had exchanged in cradle cloths our children where they lay, and called mine, Percy, his Plantagenet. What folk belief is he alluding to? Fairies, other than that. A practice done by the fairies that I talked about with Midsummer Night's Dream. The changeling child. Okay? He's essentially saying, because of who I am, Harry Hotspur really should be my child. And Harry should be, Prince Harry, Hal, should be Northumberland's. Then would I have his Harry and he mine. Because they're both Harrys. But let him from my thoughts. Which him? Hotspur or his own Harry? What think you, cuz, of this young Percy's pride? See, I think he's talking about his own son. I'm not going to think about my son right now. I can't deal with that problem. What about Percy's pride? Young Percy, that's Hotspur. Elder Percy is Northumberland. The prisoners which he in this adventure hath surprised to his own use, he keeps. See, he drags out. I mean, we heard Hotspur captured all them, lines 67 to 73 or so. It's only when we get down to 93 that we find out Hotspur is keeping all those prisoners. He shouldn't be. He should be delivering them to the king. Why? Because he is a vassal of the king. And he sends me word, I shall have none but Mordake, Earl of Fife. So out of those he listed, he says he's going to send me one. Westmoreland. This is his uncle's teaching. Notice, not his father's. This is his uncle's teaching. This is Worcester. Worcester, the town and the county, border, if I remember correctly, Wales. Okay? Malevolent to you in all aspects. So that's Westmoreland telling us Worcester opposes the king in everything. King. But I have sent for him to answer this. That is, I've sent to Hotspur. And for this cause a while we must neglect our holy purpose to Jerusalem. Okay? They leave. Act 1, Scene 2. We see the Prince of Wales enter with Sir John Falstaff. And Harry, addressing the audience, tells us, or gives us, a description of Sir John Falstaff. Falstaff asks Harry, what time of day is it? Notice, lad. What is Harry to Sir John Falstaff? Or Prince Hal, I should say.
Kid, young,
Okay, young kid, what else is he?
inexperienced.
Okay, rank-wise, what is he?
He's also his friend.
He is the next in line. How should John Falstaff be addressing the prince? My lord. Even though he's young. Hal says, thou art so fat-witted with drinking old sack and unbuttoning thee after supper and sleeping upon benches afternoon that thou hast forgotten to demand that truly which thou wouldst truly know. So, he's fat, he drinks a lot, he sleeps late, which means he's slovenly. He doesn't take control of the day, you know.
He's just like me for real.
Unless hours were cups of sack and minutes capons and clocks the tongues of bawds and dials the signs of leaping houses, whorehouses, and the blessed son himself a fair hot wench in a flame-colored taffeta, I see no reason why thou shouldst be so superfluous to demand the time. In other words, what the hell do you want to know what time it is? As if the time means anything to you, okay? So they go back and forth. And I'm going to skip a lot of it. Pons comes in, etc. And they talk about planning a robbery. They're not planning a false robbery, they're planning a real robbery. This is the prince who's going to be involved, right? They all leave except for Hal. And Hal gets the first soliloquy of the play. Now bear in mind, what does the soliloquy do again? What's the purpose of a soliloquy? It shows what the character delivering the soliloquy really thinks to be true. All right? It's showing the innermost being of that character. And this is one of Shakespeare's great short soliloquies, because it just creates all kinds of questions about Prince Hal. I know you all. Look it up on YouTube. There's some great versions of this. Okay, some of them are a little bit overdone. David Tennant has a really good one. Hiddleston is pretty good. I know you all, and will a while uphold the unyoked humor of your idleness. Yet herein will I imitate the sun, who doth permit the base contagious clouds to smother up his beauty from the world, that when he please again to be himself, being wanted, he may be more wondered at by breaking through the foul and ugly mists of vapors that did seem to strangle him. So pause there. What has he just said? First of all, I know you all. Who's the you all? Falstaff, Pons, others that are alluded to, Peto, Bardolph, Gadshill. He's saying, I know you intimately. I know how you think. I know your characters, and will a while uphold the unyoked humor of your idleness. That is, I will support it. I will stand with it. I will pretend to be part of your idleness. Something that is idle is what?
Useless.
Louder?
Useless.
Useless, stagnant. An idling car never does what?
Moves.
Moves. What is the purpose of a car? To go from point A to point B. An idling car is entirely pointless. Okay? So their idleness is pointless. There's no purpose. So he says, herein will I what? Imitate the sun. And he gives us an image. The sun does what? The sun gets obscured, covered by clouds, contagious clouds that smother his beauty up from the world. Because notice, he's talking about the sun being up there, the world down here, and what comes between the world and the sun? Clouds. And the clouds do what for those down here? We can't see the sun. Get in a plane, you can see the sun. Okay? They smother his beauty up from the world. But when the sun pleased to be himself again, being wanted, that is, being in lacking. You know, we've had a kind of an odd February so far here in Murfreesboro. It's been relatively warm, and we've had a lot more sunlight than we normally do. I can remember many Februaries where it was just cold and dreary, cloudy, the entire month. Okay? It's what I hated about living in the Northwest, not seeing the sun for weeks on end. That's what he's talking about. Okay? Being wanted, he may be more wanted at doing what? By breaking through the foul and ugly mist of vapors that do strangle him. So he said, I'm going to be like the sun. So if he's going to be like the sun, what are Falstaff and the others? And they are doing what? Blocking him, strangling him, obscuring him. And he's going to, at some point, dispel those mists, metaphorically speaking. So what is he going to have to do? Break from them. This gets at Hal's character. So how does Hal regard Falstaff and his other friends?
Not well.
With contempt, not well. Is it contempt?
It's more like I'm around for a good time when I'm with you guys.
Okay. What else? You're really close. I mean, contempt is just my own thing. I think contempt might be a little strong. But maybe not. He's using them, right?
To avoid responsibility.
And he's using them like dirty clothes, like soiled clothing. So that think of Hal as Superman. He's not always Superman, right? Sometimes he's Clark Kent. He's using them like Clark Kent wears a suit. It hides his nature. And at times, Clark Kent has to take the suit off and be his real self. Hal is telling us, the audience, when I'm around these, it's not me. That's what? That's an act. That's a disguise.
Because if he doesn't, then he is competition for his father.
Possibly. Or because he wants to hold off doing what? Having to be Hotspur's equal. Because if he is his true self right now, what are people automatically going to do? They're going to compare him with Hotspur. Same age, they're both warriors, so to speak. Okay? So he goes on. If all the year were playing holidays, to sport would be as tedious as to work. What? He's saying, day of the year was, to me or to everyone, like Falstaff lives every day. If every day of the year we're going out and going on a binger, going to a frat party or something every night, then every day would become what?
Tedious. Boring.
If all you do is vacation, you're not vacationing anymore, right? Then you need a vacation from vacation. But when they seldom come, when those holidays seldom come, they wished for come. That is, there's something you really desire. And nothing pleases but rare accidents. He doesn't mean accidents, cars crashing together. Not that kind of accidents. Rare appearances. Why do people get, drawn to if there's suddenly a bright comet? It's because they're not usually there. Or beautiful sunsets or other, natural events. So when this loose behavior I throw off like a dirty cloak and pay the debt I never promised it. What debt? What debt will William, Prince William, have to pay at some point? What debt did Prince Charles have to pay upon the death of Queen Elizabeth? He had to step into those shoes. He had to become monarch. William has been training for that since he was 5 years old. And now with the king's cancer diagnosis, you can be damn sure all of that preparation and training has been sped up. They've already got Charles's whole death all planned out. You can be sure of it. So he says, pay the debt I never promised. Why? Did he get to choose that? No, he didn't. By how much better than my word I am? By so much shall I falsify men's hopes. Falsify their hopes. I'm going to make them think we're screwed if the king dies and he becomes king. Means they have no hope in him. And like bright metal on a sullen ground, my reformation glittering over my fault shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which hath no foil to set it off. In other words, he's telling us, I'm going to be so offensive as to make of being offensive an art form. Why? So that when the time comes, I will be so honorable, so noble, so virtuous, so perfect, everybody is going to be blinded by me. So, we'll stop there. What does that tell us about Hal?
He's planning.
Okay, true.
Smart.
Smart. What else?
It's not what he appears, more to.
Not what he appears? Is there a political philosopher predating Shakespeare that we could possibly say, if the guy had written before Hal was alive, Hal could have read him? What kind of term can we use to describe this behavior? Where you plan like this. Machiavellian. He is a Machiavellian. Okay? He's doing what? I mean, you guys have all used the term propaganda. He's doing what to the people's perceptions? What do good leaders do? They manipulate. They manipulate perceptions. He's gaslighting them. All right, we'll stop there. I'm going to send an email, I think. Haven't figured out.